She was declared as dead, and they gave us the death certificate.
Right there, I'm like, no way, she's not dead.
We were resolute in the fact that we trusted our colleagues. We knew that they were doing the right thing.
There's two different ways of being dead. They're both legal death, but one's intuitive and one's not.
Taquisha McKitty is neurologically deceased. Her family fighting to keep her on life support, arguing that she was still very much alive.
For the last year, Taquisha McKitty's doctors and her family have been engaged in a legal battle.
What we're trying to do in this case is to effectively determine if the definition of death can be changed.
This, in turn, has fed a larger controversy, one that involves ethics and science and God, about what it means to be dead and who gets to decide. Because consider this. Brain death, as a definition, as a medical concept, was only invented 50 years ago.
That was September the 20th at 12:55 that she was declared as dead, and they gave us the death certificate. As far as I know, she was in a car with someone. They were doing some type of drugs. Things went the wrong way.
One of the doctors, she goes, so we're going to be disconnecting her ventilation.
It was a little confusing because at the time we were still seeing movement.
She's not dead. Dead people don't move.
The thing is, Taquisha was moving. Doctors told Stanley and Allison that the movements were not signs of life. They were just spinal reflexes. Taquisha wasn't in a coma or a vegetative state. She was beyond that, fully neurologically dead.
Move it again, girl. Those are your hands.
So my daughter had listed herself as an organ donor. Are you rushing to get to her organs? I'm terrified. I need to call somebody, I need to call a lawyer. They're trying to pull the plug without my consent.
Stanley's lawyer got an injunction against the hospital, so doctors couldn't disconnect Taquisha's ventilator, and so they'd keep treating her body. The family's argument? They rejected the whole idea of brain death as a legitimate way of determining that someone had died.
Do you understand this to be an argument over the definition of death and how flexible it should be?
That's exactly what it is. Taquisha held the belief that life ends when the heart stops beating and the person stops breathing, and that it's for God to determine. So Taquisha's not dead.
In court filings, the lawyer argued that the hospital was legally required to respect Taquisha's religious beliefs and freedoms, like the state does in all sorts of instances.
So families should get to pick and choose heart death, brain death?
Not quite, no. What we're saying is that religious considerations, individual wishes, values, and beliefs must be taken into account.
In the last few years alone, there have been a number of high-profile legal battles between families and hospitals over the diagnosis of brain death, some on religious grounds, some on medical grounds. These cases are still really rare, but doctors and legal experts have told me that they're seeing a rise in these conflicts. So the question is, why and to what end?
Yeah, so right now I'm just gonna go back by the hospital. I usually go daily.
I try to keep my mind busy as much as I can, but I am a hot mess. Try to go to the hospital twice a week. I just kind of have like quiet time with her or quiet time with each other.
The hospital wouldn't let us inside, but Taquisha's parents have been filming things on their phones. Brampton Civic Hospital and its doctors wouldn't comment on Taquisha's status because of patient privacy and because the legal case is still ongoing. Doctors are still treating Taquisha's body with a ventilator and a feeding tube, sometimes with antibiotics or blood transfusions. It used to be that there was just one way to die. You were dead when your heart stopped, and then your breathing stopped.
Beginning about 50 years ago, we began to think of a new way of defining death based on the absence of brain function.
It had to do with technology. In the 1920s, doctors invented the iron lung to help polio patients breathe when their lungs failed them. In the 1940s came the defibrillator, which could shock a dead heart back to life. Then modern ventilators and CPR. Doctors started to see something new.
They were seeing patients who had devastating brain injury, no brain function, and yet because they had a machine that was breathing for them, their biological existence would continue. The longest recorded case of somebody very clearly diagnosed as brain dead continued to survive biologically for more than 20 years.
20 years. All of a sudden, it seemed like the human body was no longer a cohesive whole. One part could fail and then be rescued by machines. The brain could fail and the heart could keep beating. In 1968, a committee at Harvard Medical School created a second definition of death, one that was soon adopted in many places around the world. A person was dead if her heart stopped beating, or if her brain stopped functioning, and if her brain stopped functioning, she should be taken off life support.
There was concern that our ICUs were going to be filled up with these patients who had no hope of recovery but were going to be kept alive on ventilators. And so we needed a solution for that, and we needed a way of being able to procure living organs from patients who we deemed to be dead so that we would not be killing them by the removal of their organs.
The concept of brain death was a fix. The Harvard Committee's report gave rise to the 1981 Universal Determination of Death Act in America. In Canada, not every province has a statutory definition of brain death, Taquisha's province included, but physician groups included in their professional standards.
Doesn't matter how big you are, the bigger they are. We speak to a blessed generation, and we declare to that generation.
Medicine has to catch up with God. God isn't catching up with medicine. One day, some members of our church advised me that there was a man who, his daughter was sick in the hospital, and they wanted me to go visit. And I said to him very clearly, I said, you can't fight this by yourself. You can't keep this quiet. They're going to kill her.
Bishop Brereton posted about Taquisha on his Facebook page, #SaveTaquisha McKitty.
We need that death certificate rescinded. She's asleep, she's not dead.
On a recent Sunday, the bishop preached about Taquisha. He says he often does.
Taquisha, I believe, is there, looking death in the face and saying, sorry, death, not today. Hallelujah, heart still beating, head still lifting off the bed, feet and arms still contorting.
Stanley was always a Christian, but he started going to church more regularly after Taquisha's diagnosis. He even got baptized.
Legislation said she's dead, but God said she's alive.
Taquisha's doctors say she can't feel, she can't think, she doesn't have consciousness or self-awareness. Do you think they're wrong, or do you think it doesn't matter because that's not the source of her life anyway?
I'm going to pick out, that's a great question, I'm going to pick out one of the words you use, consciousness. A medical practitioner does not officiate over the realm of consciousness, of whether or not an individual is still there. She might not have any feeling. People who are drunk might not have any feeling. Self-awareness, an infant isn't self-aware.
Back in 1991, New Jersey passed a state law that allows for precisely what the bishop is suggesting, a religious exemption to brain death, which means that technically, someone could be considered brain dead in Toronto or New York City, but alive in Newark. In recent years, these religious objectors have found some unlikely allies in a small but vocal handful of doctors who think the way that we define brain death is scientifically imperfect.
Maybe most patients who are diagnosed as brain dead actually continue to have some brain function going on. And that's why you might see things like hormonally regulate their salt and fluid balance, why they can still maintain body temperature.
Dr. Truk is really clear here. He doesn't think that brain dead patients will ever recover consciousness. No one ever has. But he still thinks that people who are brain dead are living. Only because we value the higher functions of the brain so much, we've agreed to treat people who've lost critical brain function as if they are dead.
I don't see it as a medical fact. It's a social choice that we've made, I think a very reasonable one, but it's not a scientific thing. It's a social diagnosis that we've all agreed to.
To what extent is there a controversy around the definition of brain death?
The medical profession has not done a very good job of explaining to people these two different ways of being dead. And so when a family is told that their loved one is now dead, and they look at them and they say, gee, they don't look really very much different than other patients. They feel like somebody's trying to pull something over on them. That, I think, is where these conflicts get going.
Yes, we're seeing more. We are seeing families whom are asking us to provide life support in which we know that person is obviously dying. When people are faced with death, there's an absolute fear because they can't see anything beyond that, and they're afraid. And maybe we haven't done a great job as health professionals in educating the public.
Dr. Fox-Robichaud wanted me to be very clear that patients are only declared brain dead after they fail some pretty basic medical tests. So she agreed to show me the tests on a dummy.
The actual declaration starts with making sure that they don't respond to pain, so we'd be pinching here. Pupils are dilated. When we shine a light in them, they don't react to light. Cold caloric test where we put cold water in the ear and we watch for movement of the eyes. We're actually touching the eye. If I touched your corneal, went in, even if you were unconscious, but your brain was still working, you'd blink.
And then there's the apnea test. Doctors disconnect breathing machines and watch.
We will literally stand here and watch for 15 or more minutes and watch whether the chest is moving at all.
I've spoken to some doctors who say, well, these cases are really rare. Maybe we should just allow a few accommodations.
We already have massive bed pressures in the ICUs, in many of our ICUs across the country. And now we're being asked to support physiological people who we know are dead.
These days, when families are struggling to accept a brain death diagnosis, Dr. Fox-Robichaud actually does the test in front of them.
I didn't believe you, doctor, but now seeing this, I believe you.
Some doctors worry that if patients can define in advance what death uniquely means to them, there will be chaos in the ICUs. And where would it end?
Yeah, well, Taquisha has a 10-year-old daughter, Kaya, and you know, she knows her mom is in the hospital, not doing well, I guess, in a coma. I try to be optimistic, so I try to say, oh, we're trying to wake your mom up. We don't really talk to her about it that much. We just try to keep her just living her life and going to school, taekwondo, going to the girls' club at the church.
In August, a judge ruled in favor of the hospital. She agreed that Taquisha is dead, and she dismissed the family's religious objections in a kind of abrupt way. Taquisha's religious freedoms didn't need to be respected, she said, because Taquisha's already dead, and dead people don't have religious freedoms. In December, the case went to appeal. The family is still waiting for the judge's decision. And it's a hard wait. Already, Stanley's racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees.
I don't think who you are inside goes, you know? I think you're still gonna be you. But I do believe Taquisha can get better.
And what do you mean by better? Do you mean all the way better, like back to how she was?
I don't know. I don't know what better means. I know she could do better than she's at now. I believe she could get past that standard of brain death. I think she could open her eyes.
Do I feel like she might wake up? I don't know if Taquisha's gonna wake up. But you also wanna make sure that you've done every single thing ever possible before that next step comes.